The following interview is being conducted as part of the Price of Freedom Oral History Series, sponsored by the Madison County Military Heritage Commission to inform the public of the sacrifices made by those in our community on battlefields around the world. We wish to thank the Huntsville School System and the ETV Broadcast Center for their help in presenting this military heritage program. Hello everyone, I'm Tom Kennemer. Welcome to our program. Today we'll be talking with retired U.S. Army Colonel John Reitzell. John served 28 years in service to our country in various capacities, from an infantry officer in Vietnam to special operations in support of U.S. counterterrorism. He is the recipient of 3 Legions of Merit, 4 Bronze Stars, 2 of which are with Valor, and the Purple Heart. John was inducted into the Madison County Military Hall of Heroes in 2002. John, it's a pleasure to have you with us, sir. Thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure, Tom.
Are you originally from this area?
No, I'm from Monroe, Louisiana.
That started that. Did you have a big family, come from a big family?
No, I was an only child, and I woke up one day in Monroe, Louisiana, and said, I really need to get out of here.
Need to go somewhere, huh?
I need to go.
Was your dad in the military?
My dad was a P-40 jock in World War II that turned into a hump pilot in C-46s.
Now, what spurred you to, I mean, your dad was in the military. Is that what spurred you to go in the military yourself, or,
Yeah.
or got interested in ROTC? Talk about that for us.
My dad he got in the reserves in '46 when he came home, and he rose to the rank of colonel, and he took me flying and wrung me out more than once. But it was he ran the household. He's kind of a 5-word-a-week guy, but there was no doubt who was in charge, and so, and I caught it. I got the I got the bug, and I decided that I wanted to be, my goal in life was to become a paratrooper ranger with a combat infantryman's badge, which I achieved at age 22, and I've had nothing since.
Now tell us about that training, ranger training, and jumping out of planes and that sort of. Talk about that.
Well, you go to school to learn how to jump out of an airplane when it's really rather plain how to do it. The problem is not the jumping. Right. The problem is the landing. But it's a 3-week school at Fort Benning, and almost every infantry officer passes through that school, and then off to Ranger School, which in 1969-70 was a smidge tougher than it is now for bad reasons. When I was the chief of staff at Fort Benning, 28 years later, I worked with the assistant commandant, and we changed the schedule a bit on Ranger students so that they weren't eating their own muscle. They had, I mean, it was brutal from 1951 to about 1994, and it's still brutal. It depends on your perspective. If you're a Ranger student, it's brutal.
John, in the Army, you have talk about the difference in what kind of jobs that each group is supposed to do. You have the Green Berets, you have the Rangers. Talk about the difference and what all you.
The Special Forces are especially trained to do forward. They train the indigenous force, and then they also do strategic intelligence, which is long-range patrolling, and they do direct action, which is straight-up gunfight combat. So they have those 3 missions: FID, strategic intelligence, and foreign internal defense, strategic intelligence, and direct fire engagements. And they're trained to do that, and they do it well. Witness the first Special Forces 8 detachment that went into Afghanistan on horseback.
Yeah.
And then the Rangers are have turned into a quick reaction force. Chief of Staff of the Army, when the Army formed the 1st Ranger Battalion, and then a year later the 2nd Ranger Battalion, described them as the finest light infantry on the globe. And they have morphed into a raider force that doesn't dig in and defend, but goes in, takes care of business, and comes out. Usually in conjunction with some of the other classified special mission units, and they are great. They are what we have wrought is great across the Ranger Regiment. After Grenada, we found that we really needed a 3rd Battalion. So we got the 1st Battalion on the right coast, 2nd Battalion on the left coast in Seattle, and then the 3rd Battalion's at Fort Benning. So we have a regiment, the 75th Ranger Regiment now, which requires a full colonel to command it. And so the first, we call the first colonel of the regiment William O. Darby from Darby's Rangers.
Right.
And the 2nd colonel of the regiment is Frank D. Merrill from Merrill's Marauders. And then the 3rd colonel of the regiment was Wayne Anthony Downing in modern times. And now they're at, I don't know how many they've had, but those guys do great work in constant danger.
Now, after you're 22 years old, get through a training, do you go directly to Vietnam, or do you have to go to another base before being transferred?
I went to the 82nd Airborne and became a recon platoon leader in the 2nd Battalion of the 505th Parachute Infantry, which is H-, the Panthers. It's a famed infantry unit and airborne unit in the 82nd. So I got 5 months in recon, and then I went to Vietnam.
Yeah, and jumped out of a few planes while you were
Not
there.
in Vietnam, no.
No, but while you were training, though, with the 82nd, I'm sure you...
In the 82nd at Fort Bragg, we jumped once a month or more, and I went to jump master school, so I got a handful of jumps there.
You had told me earlier that was it 800-900 jumps in your career? I mean, you lose count after
the magic number is 65.
Yeah.
After that, you get a master parachutist badge, which I got in 1972, and everything else after 21 years on jump status is just piling on.
Were you ever injured? You know, break a leg or anything?
I walked away from all of them. That doesn't mean I wasn't injured.
Right.
I've got 2 that I walked away from, but I shouldn't have. But generally speaking, parachutes and the riggers are great. They open when they're supposed to. They now steer where you want them to go, sorta. And you can put an awful lot of combat power in a tiny space in a heck of a hurry.
All right, tell us about, you arrived in Vietnam. Tell us about what that was like, and what outfit were you with, and what did you do at the outset?
Well, I was a rifle platoon leader. I had orders from the Department of Army to go to the 101st Airborne Division. I got to Vietnam. The Army was in Cambodia in 1970, and I was shifted to the 4th Infantry Division, which at that time was across the Army in terms of second lieutenants was not a good place to go. It was more like the 3rd NVA Division's finest training aid is what we call it. But the 4th Division wasn't as bad as I expected it to be. I was a rifle platoon leader. The company commander left. I was a rifle company commander for a couple of months. And then I went to the 173rd Airborne Brigade and became the long-range reconnaissance patrol ops officer / platoon leader of 3 LRP, long-range reconnaissance.
What part of the country was that, Vietnam?
Central Highlands, right along the I-Corps, 2-Corps border.
The students that may be watching this interview, John, describe the terrain, the countryside there, and where you were stationed.
About like Monte Santo Mountain.
Really?
Everything
Okay.
was all mountainous in the Central Highlands with long ridge lines that had ridge lines that come off of them, both going to a water source 1,500, 2,000 meters away. Water was an issue, and we traveled primarily from water to water. And the idea was to reconnaissance in force or forced action by finding the enemy. And the long-range recon guys were fast. We did what the Viet Cong did, only we did it better. And so we mopped up. It was just wasn't even fair with the 173rd LRPs and the local VC or the NVA that we saw.
When you had some downtime, which wasn't very often, however little that, what did you do for relaxation? And tell us a little about how, did you often, were you able to sleep in tents, were you mostly on the ground, or wherever you can just
Well,
hang your head or what?
As a rifle platoon leader, didn't get a break, and we'd go out 60, 70 days at a time as a company commander with rifle strength about 106 out of 150 that was the tables of organization equipment. Everybody was either going home or coming in. Heck of a way to manage a war. The most experienced people you have are going home, and you get newbies.
Right.
And
constantly.
So constantly. It was a 12-year war that was fought 12 times. So we didn't get much of a break in the 4th ID. In fact, they resupplied us for 9 days every 12 days. Then in the long-range recon business, we had 4 to 7 man teams for 4 to 6, 7 days out in a 2-kilometer by 3-kilometer box that I selected, and we reconned it, and then we infilled these teams. And the unit was called the eyes and ears of the commanding general. We're supposed to gather intel and report, but it got to the point in the summer of 1971 that we were in direct fire engagement 24/7 for 2 or 3 months, and it was, and like I said, it just wasn't fair. So that was exciting and interesting, and I got shot down in a helicopter one day, and so.
Were you injured during that incident?
Yeah, I had been, long story, I had been hit by a bullet in the canteen, and my wife-to-be had sent strawberry Kool-Aid 1-quart packs, and I hung that stuff up every day. And next thing you know, I got a bullet in the canteen. There's red hot sticky stuff all over the inside. So I'm screaming, "I'm hit! I'm hit! I'm hit!" And the pilot's going, "Shut up! Shut up!" Shut up. So we went in 20 degrees nose low, and everybody walked. So.
Now talk about being away from home while you were in the military. How did it affect? And you weren't married at that time.
I got married on R&R in April of my.
I see. Were you? How many tours did you serve?
I did one tour that, because I came out feet first once, got extended a little bit. But you talked about dead time. If we had dead time or free time, we were all writing letters. And in a rifle platoon, you dig in at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and start cutting fields of fire and putting out claymores. And you, obviously, if you have a lieutenant that's worth having, then you're on a piece of ground that can be defended. And a U.S. rifle platoon is you better be careful in the middle of the night if you walk across a U.S. rifle platoon or a rifle company. So right before dark, everybody is in the hole and write letters home with one guy watching, and then it's dark, and you deal with the orangutans and all the flora and fauna of the jungle.
Yeah, we didn't have cell phones back then, so
No.
we always look forward to a letter from home. John, for your bravery in Vietnam, you were awarded 4 Bronze Star medals, 2 of those with valor. Tell us about some of the combat action you were involved in and what led to you receiving these valor awards.
Well, a rifle platoon by itself is, my rifle strength was about 27, and we made contact fairly often. I mean, it was always on the bad guys' terms, generally speaking, because they own the jungle. I just finished a book called "The Jungle is Neutral" by a British officer in Indonesia. And the jungle wasn't neutral in Vietnam, generally speaking. It favored the bad guy because he knew where to go and knew where to run and had all the trails pegged and all that. So we sort of engaged in, when you find them, you engage in contact. The first time that we got into a solid contact, I was hit with the first round. Long story, but I got hit with a US M79 40-millimeter grenade launcher that a bad guy whom I was looking at fired. Good news is there was a rock between me and him, and he fired low. And here's an interesting point, I think. In the 4th Division, the 4th Division was trained in 1965 and 66 by a cadre of regular Army non-commissioned officers, sergeants, and officers who came in, took the draftees, and trained them in basic combat skills, basic unit training, and in the advanced individual techniques, and then took that to Vietnam on the MacArthur model from 1922 when he was the Chief of Staff of the Army. So the 4th was the experiment, and it went over, and in the first 8 months they turned over probably 40 to 60% of the people, and then you start getting these replacements in, and so no senior officer wanted to go to the 4th Division, and that's so sometimes in the senior leadership, from my perspective, a platoon turns into a company, turns into a battalion. I never laid eyes on my battalion commander.
Really?
Nobody above the rank of captain did I ever see in the jungle, which was fine with us, you know. Now we heard him, you know, why aren't you moving faster? Why aren't you down here with me? You know, so,
come on down.
Yeah, by the way, my battalion commander got a Silver Star and a Distinguished Flying Cross flying over a contact that I was in. Come on, man. But he sent us ice cream that was totally melted after the contact. But I threw 2 grenades in the contact, one with wounded with the right hand, one with the left hand, kind of broke the back of the ambush, and we assaulted through, and my platoon put me in for a higher award than the Bronze Star, but that's what it came down to. And it was probably worth an ARCOM than a Army Commendation rather than a Bronze Star. But I'm really proud of the fact that it was my guys that put me in for this, and not somebody in the rear that didn't know what happened.
Exactly. Now, was this the time that you were? I think you were wounded more than once, right?
Yeah, I got a couple of John Kerry wounds, but I got blasted the first time, and I probably should have paid more attention to the second or third time. I forget which one it was, and the helicopter crash was yet another. But we pulled up to a trail. We were on a trail, but we had a big contact the day before. We're on a trail and on the side of a ridgeline, contouring down the side of a ridgeline, straight from the contact we'd had the day before. And the point man stopped, and everybody's, you know, you can smell the bad guys. They smell like campfire smoke and dead fish. And so from about 500 meters in, you know you're in bad guy country. They could smell us because we smell like Marlboro and Old Spice. It's called OPSEC. We didn't do it very well. So the point man comes back and he says, LT, which way do you want to go? The one we're on continues, one goes down, one goes up. I'm thinking I'm going up. And so I got to the trail junction. Now, picture this, 23-year-old second lieutenant. The point man's been there for 10 months. And he says, LT, there are tracks on the trail. And I said, let me look. So I went up to the trail and got down on my knees and went, oh, there are people here that aren't us. And that's about all I could discern from that in my level of experience. But I told the point man, I said, I'm going to walk 15 feet up the trail going up just to get around the first corner and see what it looks like. And I got 15 feet, and it was an L-shaped ambush, and they sprung it on me, which left my entire platoon in a line, and they're in a line this way. So you, as the Navy calls it, you cross the T. We routed them going that way. But so it was a successful contact, except me and the platoon sergeant and the weapons squad leader, the 3 senior men in a rifle platoon, were all wounded. So I stayed in and let the platoon sergeant and the weapons squad leader get medevaced. You know, went into my phone booth and changed into my Superman suit. And
back at it.
Yeah, about 5 o'clock in the morning, I passed out from lack of blood. So
Did you have lingering effects from that wound?
Every now and then I get a little twinge in my hip, but that for about 5 years it lingered fairly well, and then it just kind of, I guess it got encapsulated, the one piece of shrapnel that left in my boo-hiney. But most of it was the rock, which tore my M16 apart, and I got rock shreds in my hands, and I got a nice little piece of shrapnel in my left knee. But for all intents and purposes, when you got a 5-meter kill ratio weapon, it's going to kill everything in 5 meters. And it landed about 2 feet in front of me. So I'm blessed to be here.
Fortunate to be right
and
here
I had,
now.
my next one was a gunfight with a guy about where you are. And I had to go back and clean up my clothes after that one because he scared me absolutely out of my mind. He probably had been asleep. And then all of a sudden he rolls out from behind this tree firing, and I'm standing right there. The good news is I actually had a round in the chamber, which is a violation of the division commander's policy because we were killing each other left and right. We had 9 fratricides in July of 1970 in 1 battalion in 4th Division.
Wow.
And what happened, the kids are untrained and they think if there's bullets coming out the end of their gun, nobody's going to hurt them. And so they walk with it on full automatic, and you can't stop them. I don't care what kind of leader you are. And then they trip over a root and squirt 2 guys off. And so we had all kind of problems with fratricide. So the division commander says, okay, only point and point slack, drag and drag slack can put a round in the chamber. Well, I got shot the first time because I didn't have a round in the chamber. So I corrected that for the second time, and I managed to assist this guy to his maker.
John, I want you to share with us who prepared you. And when I talk to the veterans, most of them will say, well, it's a tough sergeant. My dad was a disciplinarian when I was at home, had a tough sergeant in training. Who prepared you to take the actions you did in combat?
I think it was a combination of people. The ROTC cadre that we had at what is now the University of Louisiana Monroe was excellent. All combat veterans, all very, very professional officers and non-coms. And they weren't there because they were duds. They were there because they were training us, and boy, did they.
They had experience.
Oh,
right?
big time. And we got it. And they were terrific. And then when you go into a unit, I went into recon, 2nd of the 505th Parachute Infantry, and my platoon sergeant had been in that platoon on and off for 13 years. So he had a little reconnaissance experience, and so he taught me a lot of things, but he taught me recon, and he taught me when to say what to say and when to say it in terms of reconnaissance, in terms of what you're looking at, and so forth. So I got a college education before I went to Vietnam. The tuition was high.
I know people often wonder, is it okay to be afraid or scared in combat? How would you answer that? I asked all the veterans that. How would you answer it?
If you ain't scared, you ain't alive. I'm telling you, it freezes people. And the more experience you get, the less, you don't get any less afraid, but you get more accustomed to incoming bullets and loud, unbelievable noise in the contact. And then the fact that you're going to see your best friend with a hole in him. And yesterday we were talking about writing letters home. We was talking about his sister, his mother, and now he's in a plastic sack, never to be seen or heard from again by the people he loved the most, his family and the guys he died with. So you never quite get used to that, particularly a leader. I mean, I got this huge black hole right in here that's just dead from that. But the soldiers are versatile. They come back well, and the more experience they get. I had an experience with draftees in the rifle platoon and the rifle company that there was an occasion, and they knew what to do and how to do it. It was kind of hard to do it under fire. And once they got used to doing it under fire, they got mad and executed.
The training kicked in.
The training kicked in, and their emotions kicked in. You know, Tom just got shot. I'm going to go kill a.
So and so. Yeah.
So.
John, of course, you served during the war, and through the years, I'm sure you've seen a few war movies. Do you think war is depicted accurately in most of the movies or TV movies that you've seen?
No. The only one that I like is We Were Soldiers by General Hal Moore and Joe Galloway. And it was a good depiction. General Moore was on the sidelines of making that movie every day. And that about LZ X-ray and the
that
fight.
happened in 1965, I believe.
1965,
yeah, right.
we reflagged the 11th Airborne Division as the 1st Cav. Why did we do that? Because the 1st Cav was the first unit in the United States Army to lose its division flag when the Chinese counterattacked across the Yalu in 1950. So, and I don't know how this happened, but Eleanor Roosevelt told Harry Truman that the 1st Cav would never serve on friendly soil again until they re-earned their colors. So we reflagged the 11th Airborne to the 1st Cav, and they went promptly over and re-earned their colors. And General Hal Moore was the best it's been. He's as good as it ever was.
Do you often wonder, would you do it all over again?
In a New York minute.
No hesitation?
No hesitation.
Yeah. Let's get back to, now you mentioned earlier you're a master parachutist, you know, made over 500 jumps, 800 now, you lose count after so many.
65.
Describe to our audience what it's like to jump out of a plane.
Well, the first time your eyes are closed and you pee in your pants, so we call that a night water jump. And then the second time you know what's going to happen and you're really afraid, and then by number 5 you're okay with it, but it still doesn't. It doesn't really start to get until you get into an airborne unit and you start doing it all the time, and then it just. And
they're not all daytime jumps. They're sometimes at night.
To be a jump master, you have to do night tactical jumps, and so it gets tough on you. The jump master course is the hardest course I took in the Army in 28 years. It was. I mean, the non-coms were absolutely death on you. And the commanding general said, if one of my blood burns throws you out of jump master school, you're not good enough for the 82nd.
That's plain enough, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, after Vietnam, one of your duty stations was being the Army guy at the Air Force Academy. I want you to tell us about that assignment.
There's about 12 Army guys at the Air Force Academy and about 12 Air Force guys at West Point and Annapolis and so forth. They do switch, which is really good, I think. But we had Army guys teaching political science. We had Army guys as what West Point calls tactical officers, which run the cadet companies. And then we have tactical officers at the Air Force Academy called Air Officers Commanding. Same job. And I got there in an irregular way, and it's a way too long a story to tell, but I ended up getting the assignment to the Air Force Academy to appease a lot of senior officers that wanted me to go to the Ranger Battalion. So we went to the Air Force Academy, and I didn't have a better 3 years in the Army, but I met the commandant first day. Commandant had personally requested from the Army a guy that looked like me, smelled like me, had all my stuff and all that.
Old Spice and Marlboro.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
And he says, I want a decorated Army captain that will kick butt. Yeah. So I showed up, and the commandant had been a machine gunner in the 101st in the Korean War. So he had a Silver Star and a Combat Star on his senior parachutist badge because he had jumped into DZ Moonsign.
He knew what he's talking about.
Well, yeah, he did. He knew what he wanted.
Right.
And now he's a brigadier general in the Air Force. He went all the way to 4 stars. But he's classic. He is the poster child, 6'2", 220, good looking, and just poster child for a fighter pilot. And the decorated fighter pilot he was. He came around the desk and looked at me and says, "You're not exactly what I had in mind."
That's encouraging.
Yeah. I said, "Well, why don't you give me a shot?" Yeah. He said, "Okay, here's the deal. Anything that resembles a military organization about the Air Force Academy is strictly coincidental. Change that. I want to at least let's get them all in the same color uniform every day, and get them to noon meal formations and teach them how to march. And he says, we do this incredibly stupid inspection on Saturday mornings, and as far as you can go, you need to change that. So, Roger, and then they put me in on the parachute team as the OIC, and I went through my own little airborne course there at the academy. And it was July in Colorado, and it was hot. And so we're in the pea gravel practicing landings, and so I picked up 3 little pieces of pea gravel and put them in my mouth, because that's how you keep your mouth wet.
Right.
My daddy taught me that.
Right.
Well, in 30 seconds, 4,000 cadets were talking about the new Ranger guy that ate rocks.
He must be tough if he eats rocks. Wow. And you stayed 3 years there.
3 years, yeah. 36 months to the minute.
You had a tour staring at the North Koreans on the DMZ. I want you to tell us about it. What were your duties there, John? I was the operations officer of what was known as the Frontline Brigade. The 3rd Brigade of the 2nd Infantry Division occupied in the DMZ the U.S. sector. And we swapped out battalions of units to occupy the DMZ sector. And every time we changed out, the North Koreans got really skittish about it. So I went there, and then Colonel, now Lieutenant General, retired from Sylacauga, Alabama. Jim Kreisel says, Reitzell, I brought you over here by name because we've been here at that time for about 30 years, and we haven't got a plan. There's no written plan for what it is we're going to do. Write a plan. I want to evacuate the DMZ people north of the DMZ, and I want to do that on the engineers' bridge boats, and at the same time I want to force the cav troop, ground cav troop, forward. And I want to do this and this and this. He said, this is June 17th. I want to execute this on July 7th. Wow.
So went to work, and it was, I can't tell you how much I learned from doing that. I learned that when a Korean says yes, he means I heard you. He doesn't mean he's going to do what you asked him to do. And I'm sure they've gotten better over the years, but it was 1981, I think, and it just, the coordination was, I had 6 captains in my S3 op shop, and we were all coordinating with the rocks and the U.S. units, and we had a big switch on the DMZ, and then we hit the siren on July 7th to begin the evacuation of the Freedom Village up there, plus the Panmunjom guys. And we didn't take all of them, but and they were in charge of getting the Freedom Village farmers across the river, which was like, I mean, the S3 of the Panmunjom bunch was a West Pointer. So every one of the farm vehicles that came out of the DMZ that first time had "Go Army, Beat Navy" on them. But it was, it was funny, but it was fun. And probably the most interesting thing, and what caused the Third World War to almost start, was I got a South Korean smoke company, and I wanted to smoke the river crossing to keep forward observer eyes off of where the
what was going on?
MABs were. And so I didn't know how a South Korean smoke company worked, but what they did was they put, as I recall, it was about 23 generators at about 40 feet apart down the riverbank. And when they cranked them up, and they made a lot of noise, and then they started just pouring motor oil on the engine, and the smoke was incredible. Shut down the international airport in Seoul, and the North Koreans went.
They were a little uneasy, I would imagine.
They went guano.
What is going on?
So I'm up there waving the white flag. But it was, It was a great learning experience, and then we exercised that thing the whole 16 months I was up there. So and every one of us that participated in all of those learned a lot. We learned a lot from Colonel Reitzell, and the XO was amazing, and so it was a great school.
Interesting tour, yeah. During your career in the military, one of your assignments involved special operations for the government, a highly secretive unit that conducted operations in support of U.S. counterterrorism, with the understanding that some of your missions could still be, or at least partially classified. Tell us what you can about what you did.
Well, the ones that have become declassified and written about in the public sector, one in particular that I was a leader in was the Achille Lauro incident, where the Italian cruise liner was hijacked by 4 Palestinians, and the rescue force went to the intermediate staging base, and eventually, as that all played out, there's 9 books, 2 movies, and 4 case studies done at the JF School of Government at Harvard on this particular incident. We violated about 5,000 international aviation laws. We forced down an Egyptian airplane after they surrendered the ship to capture these guys, and we captured them and put them in jail. So that was the first real, as Mr. Reagan said, that's the first real victory on terrorism, modern terrorism, that we had. And the TWA 847 was 4 months before that. The rescue team went, and that was and again, there's 2 books on that one that are really good. And then there's most everything else that was secretive is still secretive, but the press was there for Grenada. Right. We did Grenada. The special ops guys were the first guys on the ground in Grenada, and the 82nd was the follow-on occupation force, and which, by the way, was an afterthought because we thought we were going to be home for lunch, and we weren't, and we weren't because of us, not the bad guys, but it really shook us out. We got good and fast at all kinds of things, and that probably triggered the 3rd Battalion, 75th, to make that a regiment. We had chopped OPCON, operational control, of the 2 Ranger battalions to the commanding general of the 82nd, which, for no other reason that you don't need national assets working for a division commander, shouldn't have been done. And these 2 lieutenant colonels are engaged down at the tactical situation, not up at some general. So we needed a colonel in there. So the 3rd Regiment was born, or the 3rd Battalion was born, and the regiment was born after Grenada in '84. We did that one, and we did pretty much did Panama. And the worst casualties that we took were a SEAL team that took some serious casualties in Panama.
John, did you volunteer for this type of duty, or were you chosen? How did you get involved?
I was picked from among my peers.
Among your peers.
Among my peers. However, I wouldn't change that at all. Man, what a great job and what a great time.
How long were you involved with that?
4 years in what is now known as JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, and I spent another tour at MacDill in U.S. SOCOM, U.S. Special Operations Command. So 5, 6, 7 years.
John, I want to mention something about the Legion of Merit. This award is given to those in the military for the performance of outstanding services and achievements to our country. You've received 3 such medals. Were all those awards involved special operations, or some of your military operations?
No, normally, there's no such thing as normal in the U.S. Army, but if you command a battalion successfully, you get, hopefully you will receive a Legion of Merit, and then normally after your first, normally, again, there's no such thing as normal, you get selected for the U.S. Army War College. And so then you come out of there and you command a brigade, hopefully, and you get probably a Legion of Merit for commanding a brigade, and then you get a Legion of Merit for retiring because you have conducted X number of years as a very successful officer. And I can't remember what any one of the Legions of Merit say, but it's a fantastic award.
Quite an honor, yes.
It is quite an honor.
Now, you retired from the military in the late 90s. How did you wind up in Huntsville, and what did you do when you arrived here?
In 1976, I was picked to be Major General George S. Patton. That's Prince George, King George's son.
I see.
King George being the World War II veteran.
Yeah.
As he commanded the 2nd Armored Division and was the first son to ever command the same division that his father commanded. And it was known at that time as Patton's own 2nd AD. He changed that right away because he said it's nobody's own 2nd Armored Division. And about halfway through my tour, I got selected to be his aide-de-camp, which was a chunk of history. It was awesome. And so when we going through that process, being the aide-de-camp, I obviously learned a lot of history. Me and the 2 drivers referred to the office as the museum and the house as the antique shop. And I mean, there was so much stuff in there that you just couldn't believe. And so the old man was just an outstanding division commander. Everybody just loved him to death. And say the question again.
Well, it's about how did you wind up after you retired in the 90s, how did you wind up in Huntsville, and what did you do?
When General Patton left, he says there's 2 jobs that are requisite for a captain of your capabilities. And I'm going, uh-oh.
What am I in for now?
Yeah, that's right. He says G3 operations or G1 officer personnel management. And of course, G3 ops is the best job in the Army in a division for a senior captain.
Right.
And so I said, sir, let me go home and think about it. Ha, ha, ha. Yeah. So I came back the next morning, and he and I met. I got to work at 4:45, and he got to work at 5 o'clock, and he was ill-humored in the morning. Yeah. we always had an exchange with me standing at attention. But he said, before he even got in his office, he says, which one are you going to take? And I said, sir, G3 Ops. And he said, I thought so. You're going to G1 Officer Personnel Management. Oh, my God. The G1 was Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Forrest Rogers Tomlinson. Colonel T lives here in Huntsville. And I called him and I said, when I was the Chief of Staff at Fort Benning, so I worked for him for 7 months at Fort Hood in 1977. And then I'm at Fort Benning as the Chief of Staff, which is a thankless job. Yeah. And so I called Colonel T and I said, you got something for me? He says, absolutely. You got to come to Huntsville, Alabama. I said, well, I've been there twice. I'm not sure what's there. Yeah. And he said, it's great. Yeah. Don't worry about it. Come on. Yeah. So we came over here, we interviewed, and so I went to work for him at Computer Sciences Corporation. Now, parenthetically, Colonel Tomlinson received the Distinguished Service Cross in 1967, I believe. He's West Point 58, might have been 66, as an advisor to the South Vietnamese, and his unit got overrun. He was the senior advisor to the operations officer of a battalion or a brigade, and so he took the staff in to reinforce, and they got overrun again, and he got severely wounded a couple of times and shot his thumb off, and that's always been my pleasure to say, you're really not a human because you don't have an opposing thumb on this side. But he gave me a job at Computer Sciences Corporation here in Huntsville, and it was hard to transition, and eventually I left CSC and went to Dynetics. Homegrown, excellent leadership, a lot of good fun. Colonel T had retired, and so I got 18, 19 years of being a bottom-feeding, scum-sucking defense contractor.
Well, some of our defense associates may be But anyway,
they know what they are.
They know,
we all know what we are. We just haggle about the price.
I want you to tell us about your family now. Tell us about your.
I couldn't have made it with. Couldn't have made anything out of myself at all without my wife. We met when she was 9, I think, or 10 years old, maybe a little 11, and I was in pharmacy school at Louisiana Monroe. And she was a little girl that came into the drugstore. A whole bunch of them did. And eventually, she graduated from high school and went to college. I came home on leave, and I said, So we started dating, and then I'll say this, we fell madly in love, and we got married on R&R because I thought I had 57 days left in the country, and I thought, surely I'm not going to get blasted again.
Yeah.
Wrong. So,
didn't work out that way. Yeah.
We came back, and our first assignment was the Florida Ranger Camp, which is at Eglin Air Force Base. So we got ourselves a nice apartment and eventually bought a condo on the bay. And so we had a great first couple of years and married life on the beach in Fort Walton and Destin. And so eventually the first child came, born at Eglin Air Force Base. He's now a 44-year-old lawyer in West Palm Beach with a wife of 19 years and 2 grandchildren. One is graduating from high school this year and the other one's 13, and they are as precious as anything you can.
Does that make you feel old, John?
It just hurts my back, Tom.
You're gratified, though, like me. I understand, yeah.
Then my second child was born when I was the aide-de-camp to General Patton at Fort Hood, and my wife, being as she is, they should have named her Frank or Ernest, and she told General Patton straight up, she says, I'm going home to have this baby, and he said, I like your honesty. I wouldn't go out to that vet center to have a baby myself, you know. He was honest too.
Yeah.
So she went home and had Robin, and Robin is, I guess, I'll hedge a bit. She's 30-ish.
Yeah, yeah.
And she has 2 grandchildren. She's married to a Georgia Tech engineer who teaches advanced math at a high school. They have 2 children, one 5 and one 3, and the little one's a boy, and he's all boy, and she's now validated childbirth.
Fantastic. Now, you may have retired, but you're still quite active. Talk about some of the things you're still involved with in the community.
Well, I speak professionally for Young America's Foundation occasionally these days. It was pretty hot and heavy there in the early OOs, and I've spoken to my own Rotary Club 5 or 6 or 7 times, and the Downtown Club and the Madison Club and the Kiwanis, and I've spoken at University of Alabama College professionals twice, and at Auburn and Florida State, University of North Carolina State, University of Ohio, Arkansas State.
You haven't retired, John.
Cal Berkeley. Went in there looking for snipers and was preaching to the choir. Had 80 some odd people there, and they were, wow. So Berkeley was interesting. Redlands College is another very liberal school that I spoke there in California. And then I don't believe I've been to Texas, but the Arkansas State trip was really an incredible trip because 2 of the passengers on TWA 847 live in Conway, Arkansas.
Is that right?
They came to hear me speak, and they weren't real happy. You know, the fellow says, you know, we weren't real interested in you cowboys crossing the med and killing us. Yeah. I said, well, I think we have a reputation of not killing hostages. Yeah. We kill the other guys. Yeah. And so eventually, as I talked through a timeline from the day Muhammad died until 9/11, he kind of opened up a little bit.
I see.
We became friends, but that was wickered by, you may know, Matt Vale from Huntsville, Alabama.
Heard of it.
Matt was Little Paul Sanford's campaign manager and others. Went to UNC and was the football photographer. And Matt went to Florida to help Rick Scott and fell in love with Mrs. Scott's chief of staff. They got married and they're in St. Louis. And, but Matt brought me to Arkansas State. He was working for the Leadership Institute, and that's one of the most memorable trips.
I see. You're still quite active, and that's good. And keeps us young, John. Sure
well,
does.
I'm a Rotarian, so I'm out there with the Rotary Club.
Our last question, what would you like for young people to learn and hopefully remember from your military and government-related experience?
Well, 1 foot at a time. That's how you get through physical things, and mental things is one foot in front of the other. Your brain quits long before your body, and don't let your brain quit. Do not quit. If you have I'm gonna speak to some 9th graders next week, and the message is, where are you going to be in 5 years, and what are you going to attempt to be successful at? We've got daunting enemies of our country. We need leaders. We need people to rise to their leadership abilities and take charge. Some to run for office, some to be great business people to bring the economy to Huntsville, Alabama, which is happening. And we really want to see you in the workforce and not hanging out at 5 Points. So the message is, every one of you as a leader, you wouldn't be at Grissom.
Get involved.
Get involved. Deeply involved. Amen.
John, thank you, sir, for participating in our Price of Freedom interview series and allowing us to preserve your military experience for the people of this community. And thank you, sir, for your service to our country.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Appreciate that very much. Now, if you'd like more information regarding this interview or any interview in our series, please contact the Madison County Military Heritage Commission website at mcmhc.org. I'm Tom Kennemer. Thank you for being with us.